Your Creative Push, episode 135.
Just do it and move on, because if you second guess, things can drag on forever.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Steve Ferrera. Steve is a sculptor from Berkeley, California, whose work crosses many disciplines, including film, television, stop-motion animation, children's books, and collectible toys. Often inspired by mythology, religion, cartoons, and make-believe, his curious and absurd characters exist in their own cosmic events, lurking on the fringes of fairy tale and folklore. And Steve, first of all, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. Your sculptures, or creatures as you like to call them, are awesome. And I was wondering where your fascination for such unique characters came from.
Well, yeah, first, thanks for the invite. Glad to be on the show. You know, my creatures and characters, I think a lot of them come out of my childhood. Obviously, they're influenced by cartoons and animation and comic books. I'm a big fan of like fairy tales, old world fairy tales and folklore, all that kind of kid stuff that also has kind of a darker undertones. Mythology, I'm a big fan of. So I think that's where a lot of my characters and the stories behind them get pulled from.
Very cool. And I can guarantee that once somebody sees one of your sculptures, it doesn't take very long for them to recognize your unique style. And when they see one of your future pieces, they'll be able to instantly attribute it to you. And I was wondering, how long did it take you to develop such a unique style?
You know, I've been playing around with this stuff. I mean, I'm not young. I've been doing this stuff for a while, but it really has only been like the last maybe 5 years where I've really kind of focused on the style that is kind of out there now in terms of what I'm doing. You know, I started out in a very traditional background doing bronze casting and metalwork and glass blowing and ceramics. You know, a lot of the content always kind of had a very whimsical feel and whimsical nature. But it was really when I started getting into the polymer clays and casting and taking silicone molds and casting in resin, the style that I'm doing now has really kind of come to fruition, I'd say.
Yeah, and would you say that like you're locked into this style, like you found your thing kind of?
You know, it's funny because my work has been all over the place. And at some point, I decided that I really needed to kind of like focus on one direction. And if I really wanted to kind of take it serious in terms of trying to build a brand and market and sell my work and try to make somewhat of a part-time living off of it, that I had to kind of focus on one thing. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of in the past 4 or 5 years, I've really focused in this one direction. But that doesn't mean that I won't incorporate other aspects of stuff that I've done, like the glass blowing and the ceramics. But, you know, the majority of my work now does kind of focus on this one style, I'd say.
Now, you just got finished a residency at the DeYoung Museum. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was there for the month of July. It was basically, it's a 1,600 square foot gallery called the Kimball Gallery in the DeYoung Museum. And they basically let me come in there and just kind of set up shop and do my thing. It's a thing where the artist interacts with the visitors. It's kind of supposed to resemble a working studio of the artist. So I kind of set up my work there, and then people could see processes I'm dealing with and a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. You fill out an application and you pitch a proposal. And I proposed this children's book idea that I had. A children's book, but instead of drawings, it's made of with puppets and miniature sets, similar to what you see in stop motion movies. So I pitched that I wanted to do that project, and I would show all the behind the scenes stuff on how everything gets built and then lit and photographed. And they really liked the idea. I think it was something that was kind of unique that they hadn't seen before. So they gave me the thumbs up. That was about a year ago. So I had a year to really put the body of work together, which was really nice having that much time. And then that was it. I moved the stuff in. There's a handful of artists collaborating on it, illustrators, computer guys, builders, puppet makers. We went in there, showed the work, kind of fine-tuned it for the end of the show. when we photographed the sets and puppets that we had, and we probably got about a quarter to a third of the final images shot for the book.
So people get to walk through it as you're working, as you're doing the work?
Yeah, we had about a half a dozen sets in various stages of completion, so people could see like what materials were being used. People could walk behind the set, get a sense of how everything's built. One of the sets we had lit, so people could get an idea of all the lighting that goes into it before we photograph. One of the sets we was an interactive component. There's this one shot where there's this puppet on these stilts, and he's way up in the clouds. So we made this big like 10 by 10 structure, and basically the cloud element is just kind of Dacron pillow stuffing that's hung on filament wire, fishing line. So, and that's kind of a common technique that's used in the stop motion industry and the film industry. So we set it up so there were all these lines running across, and the visitors could come in and they could actually make the clouds for that set.
Whoa.
So yeah, it was, people got to see just basically how everything's made. All the, when you look at the final picture, you're just looking at a 2D picture in a book, but you never get to see what's outside of that. So that was the intention.
That's so cool. Do they actually get to ask you questions and like interact with you while you're kind of creating?
Yeah, that was like a really big part of it. It was open to the public from 1 to 5 Wednesday through Sunday. So from the hours of 1 to 5, I honestly wasn't really getting any work done. It was really having conversations with the visitors. And I knew that was going to be the case. I had talked to some artists who had done it previously, and they just said, you don't get any work done. So I knew going into it that we had to have 90% of the stuff done. So all we really had to focus on during that month was fine-tuning everything before we put it in front of camera.
Sure, that makes sense. Was that frustrating at all? Did that get frustrating then when you're like, all right, like I got to get some work done, but somebody comes up to ask you a question, or was that kind of inspirational?
It was frustrating because it's hard to do something and then put it down and pick it up like every 10, 15, 20 minutes because someone walks in. So that it really kind of breaks the creative flow. But I wasn't that worried because, again, most of it was done. But towards the end, there was a little bit of panic. Like the days right before the shoot, there was still a lot of stuff that had to be fine-tuned. So, I was like actually on the days when people didn't come in, it was actually kind of nice. But it's all good. Like one of the main selling points for them is that you get to interact with the artist. So I was totally accommodating to that.
Yeah. Do you think that flow is like really important and like kind of getting in the zone for creative people?
Yeah. I think that's one of the best parts of making art. If you can get to that spot, if you can get all the other stuff, all the other distracting stuff out of your mind and just make art. I think that's one of the best parts. I get into that zone when I'm in the sculpting phase, when it's just me with this one sculpting tool, working on the piece. Like that's my happy place. I don't think it's easy to get to all the time because a lot of the times there's the frustrations and the second guessing, but I think when you've been doing it for so long, it's easier to get there just because you can trust your instincts a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that just comes from just putting in the time and just really getting to know yourself as an artist. Are there some things that kind of hold you back when you're in the studio from doing the work?
Yeah, I think it's the same stuff that all artists deal with, time management and discipline. I just mentioned second guessing. I think the lack of confidence when you're starting out with a new process or new pieces, I think that can be a setback. The time management aspect and the discipline, I think, is one of the hardest things. I'm super ADD, so I can get distracted so easily. So it just takes work, it's just something I to remind myself.
And is it that easy, just like reminding yourself, or do you have any other tips for balancing your time?
Yeah, I have all these weird little strategies to try to get me in the studio and to keep me in the studio. I think one of the hardest things is if you're working on your own stuff and there's not crazy deadlines, it's so easy to get distracted. One of the first things I try to do is I try to get up early and I try to get into the studio as fast as I can and get to work. It's so easy for me to end up on the couch, like on the computer. So getting into the studio first thing in the morning is definitely one of the most important things. I obsess about the clock. Like I'll look at the clock. If it's 8 a.m, I will tell myself that I have 16 hours before midnight to get stuff done. And then at 8:30, I'll say, okay, now I have 15 and a half hours. So I have all these weird little things to like mentally trick me into staying focused. But when I think about it, if I can put in like a 16-hour day in the studio, I can get a crazy amount of stuff done.
Yeah, I love that idea too of like tricking yourself, because sometimes you are your own worst enemy. And yeah, like you're saying with no deadline, it's just like, all right, well, I can check Facebook or I can, do this other thing. And it's just so easy to find those distractions. And then it's just really hard to give yourself self-imposed deadlines. So I think it's really important to do, though. And I like those tricks.
Yeah. I do this thing a lot where I yell at myself, these ridiculous like pep talks where I just yell at, it's like the drunk high school coach who's students. I always got to find these things to motivate myself. I always have this like friendly competition with artists that I like. So whatever I got to do to get me in the studio. I mean, sometimes I'll go straight when I wake up in the morning, like it's 7 a.m, I'll go straight to the refrigerator. Whatever energy drink was on sale at the store, I'll have some in the refrigerator and I'll just start my day off. Like I'll walk there with my eyes closed and do a couple shots of that stuff. It's probably not like the healthiest option, but it's so easy for me to just like, it gets the fog out of my head. And sometimes that's all it takes to get me into the studio. Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of really tricking myself into making sure that I'm in the studio actually working. And then I'll have a little reward system too. Like if I get everything done I had planned on getting done, then I can, zone out and watch Netflix for an hour or something.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about not doing that reward first. I think a lot of people do that. They're like, all right, let me watch an episode of whatever, and then I'll do the work. And that's just like a recipe for disaster, especially for me. That does not work for me, because then it's like always the best show ever, and it leaves you on a cliffhanger, and then you're like, all right, I can get that work done tomorrow.
Yeah, and then your day is gone.
And then, your week is gone sometimes.
Right.
You mentioned second guessing, which is something that comes up commonly on this show. And I know it certainly occurred for me a lot, is just second guessing yourself. What advice would you give to people who haven't kind of been down the long path? They're just kind of starting out and developing their style, and they are still kind of second guessing what they're doing. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I think you just got to trust your instincts. I have students all the time who have that problem, and they like, oh, should I do A or B? And then I tell them like, well, if I gave you 2 seconds to make the decision, what would you say? And they'd say A. And I would be like, that's your instinct telling you to go with A. And, my experience has showed me that 85% of the time your instinct's right. So just do it and move on, because if you second guess, things can drag on forever. Even if your instinct is wrong, it doesn't matter. You make a mistake and you learn from that mistake. Sometimes making mistakes is better than doing it right, because then you've experienced the other side where you don't want to go. For a while, I worked in the animation and visual effects industry, where you just have nonstop crazy deadlines and you have to make decisions. You don't have the option of sitting there and taking a day or two to decide on something. And that kind of trained my brain to really just kind of trust my instinct and be comfortable with making a decision, whether it's right or wrong. Before I was working in that industry, just making art on my own, it's so easy to not do something because you don't know if it's right. And, I think that's also a certain like lack of confidence that I think you might start out with, but after you do it for so long, that lack of confidence disappears. But like you're saying, when you're just starting out, you don't realize that. You realize that 10 years down the line. So if I could tell my younger self 10 years ago, I would say just don't sweat the lack of confidence and trust your instincts.
Yeah, instincts are so important, and I just did a episode about that, about kind of trusting yourself. And It's like that feeling that you get when you're tweaking something and it doesn't quite feel right, and then you tweak it and it does feel right, but then if you tweaked it even further, it doesn't feel right again. And if you have that instinct where like, all right, that's right, you know, it's right for you, and it doesn't have to necessarily be right for other people, you know, because if you want to be innovative and develop your own style, you can't really pay attention to anybody else. You have to trust those instincts, and trusting the instincts also makes the process go a lot faster, because you can just make the decision. And like you said, if you do make a mistake, you just figure it out later.
Yeah, and you're training yourself by tweaking it left and right over and over. You're training yourself to know what you like. Yeah, I mean, I think that's invaluable.
Absolutely. I was wondering, did you have like a best or a worst creative moment?
I mean, the best creative moment, I mean, the pulling off the DeYoung show was a big accomplishment for me. It was a big challenge to see. I mean, I was kind of doing that project it was like a synthesis of all the skills I had developed up to this point, and seeing if I could do a project that was a lot more ambitious than what I normally did. And it turned out great. So that was definitely a good moment. You know, in terms of a worst moment, there was a long period in my life not too long ago where I just felt like, in terms of my art career, it was very stagnant. And I came to the conclusion that the only way I was going to get to where I wanted to go in terms of taking a step to becoming a part-time artist and then a full-time artist, that the only way that I was going to be able to do that was if I quit my full-time job and focused more on my art. It was a little bit of a risk because, you know, I was teaching full-time. The money was great. The benefits and retirement was great. So I was taking a big hit on that. It kind of like put me in this survival mode. I mean, it's just one of those things like, how bad do you want it? If you make it work, then you don't have to go back to a full-time job. You know, I always hear these stories about artists who are full-time artists, and their story is that the reason they became a full-time artist is because they really had no option. They lost their job, or they didn't have any work. And it was kind of like they were on survival mode, and it forced them to do it. That was kind of my inspiration for doing it. I think that was a good decision.
Yeah, I think that is a common story that I hear too, that something happened, and it's for the people where, you know, everything's going great with your other non-creative job as far as money, but you don't feel fulfilled, and you want to make that leap. It's really a difficult thing for all the reasons that you're saying. I'm at that point too, and I think a lot of other people are too. And I guess what would be your advice, not necessarily to advise them to quit their job, but just to figure out what the best kind of move is?
I think it's really good to have a game plan. I mean, if you want to get into the position where you're selling your work and you're marketing yourself and you're actually making enough income to survive part-time or even full-time as an artist, I think you really need to, of course, there's the art side, but the business side is just as important. You know, I mean, you really have to look at, you know, you have to get your work out there first. You have to build a customer base. You have to do a lot of trial and error, figuring out what your price points are. But it's all out there. It's so easily accessible these days. And social media is such it's just free publicity and free marketing. You know, just get your stuff out there as soon as you can and start pricing it and see what people pay for it. Get a website, an e-commerce website, you know, the social media stuff like Facebook or Instagram. I just go with Instagram, and actually a majority of my sales are off Instagram. So it's this big puzzle. It's this big puzzle that you just have to figure out how it works for you. But the sooner you start doing it, the sooner you start making mistakes and fixing your mistakes. You know, I've gone through like a half a dozen different websites, a few different e-commerce websites. So it's just a process of fine-tuning it and making it work. And I think you really have to, I don't think you can just sit back and say, oh, it's just going to happen. You really have to be proactive about making it happen. And that also includes like networking, meeting other artists, going to gallery shows. You know, all these opportunities are going to happen if you make them happen. I mean, that's kind of my philosophy.
Yeah, and everything you mentioned too, you can do before you quit your job, like before you make that leap. You can kind of take baby steps, but take them fast, and spend as much of your time, your free time that you do have, if you have a full-time gig that you're trying to get out of, spend as much of your free time just grinding it out, just pushing yourself as kind of as hard as you can, and seeing, even if you could do both, I guess, first.
Yeah, I like that. Take baby steps and take them fast. I think that's a great way to look at it. I have always been working a full-time teaching job, but also doing this stuff on the side. So for a long time, I've been slowly figuring out how to make it work. And at that time, I decided to jump off and get into my art more. I had enough knowledge, a strong enough background on what was working and what I needed to do to make it work better, where it was kind of at the point like, okay, well, now that I have this extra time, I can devote that extra time to making it better.
Going along with what we're kind of talking about, what would you say that, your art and your creativity brings to your life?
I mean, it's always cool if you can get to that happy place that you were talking about earlier. But that I don't think is the driving force for me. I think for me, it's like a challenge. For me, it's the challenge of making something, of doing something, seeing if I have the skill set to put something together. I'm constantly experimenting with new materials and seeing what's possible. It's almost like a game for me, seeing if I can get it to work. The DeYoung show, doing that children's book. I have a little bit of experience in all those, a lot of experience in some areas of all that whole production, from the story development to the concept art, to the engineering, to the building, to the sculpting, to the editing. I've touched all those bases sometime in my life. So it was like, can I take all of this and do everything and make it work? So I think for me, the aspect of art that interests me the most is the challenge that I get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the one way in life that you can challenge yourself completely by yourself, if that makes sense. It's not like a job you take on. It's like the job that you give yourself, and to be able to push yourself in that way, when you come out the other side, it's like the most fulfilling thing I think in the world. So that's awesome.
Yeah. You come out the other side and it's successful, then that just lays the groundwork to keep moving forward and doing bigger and better stuff.
Absolutely. Steve, this has been awesome, but it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to kind of reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best words of advice and really push them to pursue their creative passions.
The big question, huh?
The big final moment.
The Nike cliche, just do it, which is as cliche as it is. I think that's the best advice. We talked about second guessing. We talked about not trusting your instinct. Don't sit around second guessing yourself. Don't sit around waiting for inspiration. I always remember that quote by Chuck Close: inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us show up and get to work. Just get in the studio and do it. The more you're working, the more you're going to produce, for better or for worse. If it's good, great. If it's not good, even better. You learn from it. So many of the mistakes I've made have led to going down different roads that have helped my work to evolve and develop and become better. So if you're not confident about something, the only way you're going to break that is if you just keep doing it over and over and over. Try new things, I would say, is important. You just got to keep filling your toolbox with different processes and techniques, and don't become complacent with doing one thing. I think in order to evolve and take your game to the next level, you always have to keep experimenting. One example of that, for the longest time, I didn't know anything about color or color theory. And I always used to use the excuse that I was a sculptor and I can get by on my sculpting skills. And then I was asked to teach a color theory class at a college I was teaching. And I said, yeah, I knew how to do it. Even though I didn't, because I wanted the money and I needed the work. So I spent 3 months just devouring every book on color and color theory that I could find. And the end result is that it was a game changer for me. Now I can look at color and just totally understand it. It's a science, the way our brains process color. So now the whole aspect or the whole painting component in my work is just really at a new level, because I decided to learn something new that really wasn't something I expected to be in my toolbox.
Yeah, I think we were talking about instincts before, and I think a lot of people have that instinct of they know what they don't know, kind of. They know where they have to put the work in, and sometimes that's pretty overwhelming because they know the amount of time and effort and sometimes pain that will cause. But, if you know what you need to know, then just figure out a way to know it. Just do it, put in the time, and also put in the time with your work. If you're scared of something, like you're saying, just do it. I think there's no better advice than that. Just do it and figure it out.
Yeah. And I what you said about taking so much time and so much effort, I used to always think like, oh, I'm wasting my time doing this. This isn't really helping. Like, what am I doing? But when I look back on that, like even like every little thing you learn, as long as you're just doing, every little thing that you learn is going to help you evolve as an artist. So, every time I'm doing something, I try to get something out of it.
Dude, Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was fun.
And you can find Steve at steveferrera.com. And on Instagram, he is Steve Ferrera. And you can head to our show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/Steve Ferrera. That's SteveFerrera, to find everything that we talked about today. And that's it. Thanks, man.
Bye.
Thanks to Steve. I had a really fun time talking to him. And, the idea of instincts has come up a lot recently. And it's really important to strike this home because I really like the example that he brought up about speaking with his students who are having doubts and second-guessing themselves. And he says, should it be option A or option B, answer within 2 seconds? And a lot of the time, just going through that exercise is really important because it makes the decision happen so much faster as opposed to, thinking about what's the perfect way to go, the perfect route to go with your creative pursuit. And sometimes for very, very small decisions. And I really like what he had to say about, pick one, go with it, because that's what your intuition tells you to do. That's what your instincts tells you to do. And then almost looking forward to making mistakes, because you learn so much more. So not over-analyzing, not thinking too hard about which way to go, because then you're just stagnant and you're not creating and you're wasting so much time and causing yourself way more stress than you need to. So really just try to do that. Try to figure out how you feel about something very quickly and going forward with it. And then if it turns out not to be right, well, you just learned something by doing it as opposed to waiting for a magical answer to happen. You got to make that answer yourself. You got to figure it out yourself. So that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. And we will be here for you on Wednesday if you need the push again. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you then. Bye, everybody. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.